It was the end of April, and I was moving out of my home in Chicago all the way to Nevada. I hired a company to take all my boxes and ship them to the new house, just to make it a little bit easier on me. I wanted to take a road trip down there and stay at some hotels or AirBnBs on the way and just relax for a few days. The total drive would take around 30 hours, so I split that in thirds and decided I would drive 10 hours each day and stay somewhere overnight. After planning out the times, I figured that my first stay would have to be on the far edge of Nebraska. I scrolled through Airbnb, looking for anything cheap, as Nebraska didn't really have much to see, so I really just wanted a place to stay for 8 hours and then head back out on the road. I found a small one-story home with 2 bedrooms. Although I didn't really need the 2 bedrooms, the price was a really good deal, so I didn't mind the extra space. However, I did find it a little bit strange that they only showed pictures of 1 bedroom. Again though, it didn't make much of a difference for me, so I booked it for the next night and got ready for bed. In the morning, I finished packing up my car with the rest of what I had and started the drive. I left a little bit later than I had wanted to, but I figured it wouldn't be much of a big deal, other than having to drive in the dark for a few hours. If you've ever driven through Nebraska, you would know that it's very plain. There's long stretches hundreds of miles long of barely any light or buildings at all. A couple hours after dark, I pulled up to the Airbnb. It was off the long empty road I'd been on, and down a short gravel path. Initially, I was a little bit disappointed, as it looked a lot more worn down on the outside than they had shown in the pictures. I reminded myself that I was only staying for a few hours just to sleep, so it didn't matter too much. I grabbed a couple of my bags and headed to the front door. Usually, the owners leave the key in a key box and give you the password, but this door had no key box. In fact, it actually had no lock at all. It was one of those plain doorknobs you'd usually see on a closet door. I started to get a little uneasy, but I didn't really have any other option than to stay here. I opened the door and stepped in, and to my surprise, it was actually fairly nice on the inside. It was small, but the living room and kitchen were well furnished and seemed to be kept up with. I went to the first bedroom, but noticed that it too did not have a lock. Thankfully, the second bedroom did, so that's where I decided to unpack in. There was one thing that got me really creeped out about this bedroom, though. Right in front of the bed on the wall was this small old doorway, maybe 3 feet tall and 2 feet wide. This was the actual picture I took of this doorway in the room. The more I looked at this door, the more unsettled I got, but there was no way I was staying in a room that I couldn't lock. I tried to open it just to check what was behind it, but it was locked from the other side. I figured the owner probably just kept some cleaning supplies back there or extra towels or something, but still, this door gave me the creeps. I was getting pretty tired though, so I only unpacked what I needed for the night and started to get ready for bed. I woke sometime in the middle of the night, hearing a soft tapping noise coming from the edge of the bed. It was very subtle, but the whole house was silent aside from the tapping. I reached blindly for my phone on the nightstand and turned on the flashlight as quick as I could. As I shined the light towards the edge of the bed, the tapping stopped. I'm not one to get scared easily. Sure, I'll get creeped out or nervous, but never scared. But something about that small doorway on the edge of my bed in that moment made me truly scared. I jumped out of bed and turned on the lights, and grabbed everything and rushed out of the house as quick as I could. It was still really dark outside, and I couldn't see much, but as I was backing my car out of the gravel path, I swear I saw a man lying on the ground behind the house. I drove down the road for probably 30 minutes before pulling over and texting the owner to tell him that there might be someone in his house and to call the police. I continued down the road for a couple hours until I found a small town, and I parked in a grocery store parking lot just to get some sleep. I still don't really know what happened at that Airbnb, but the creepiest part was that when I checked my phone in the morning, I saw my message had been read just a few minutes after I sent it, but the owner never responded to it. My boyfriend and I were visiting my parents back in Michigan for a few days, and we didn't want to stay with them for, let's just say, obvious reasons. We ended up finding an Airbnb about 15 minutes away from their house. A cute little one-bedroom condo. The inside was completely redone and was very modern, so it wasn't the cheapest. The host seemed nice and had good ratings, but we did see a few comments that raised some red flags. Most of the negative comments mentioned strange experiences with the neighbor. Now, I've had some crazy neighbors, so I'm not one to judge. I simply brought it up with the host before booking, and she stated her neighbor is nosy and sometimes when people try to get into the Airbnb, she gets defensive. But she said she'll let the neighbor know we're staying and what we look like, so everything should be fine. On the day we arrived, everything went smoothly. We met the host who lived nearby, and she gave us the key to the entry door and the code to the actual apartment. We unpacked all of our stuff and then headed over to my parents for dinner. I had a few drinks throughout the night to deal with my mother, and before we knew it, it was 10 p.m. and time to head back to the Airbnb. We pulled up to our rental. Now, each complex has 4 apartments, 2 on the bottom and 2 on the top, and the one we were staying in was on the top left. However, when we pulled up, we could see a small figure standing in between some curtains in the window of the apartment on the top right. Instantly, I felt weird. Who just stares out their window like that? My boyfriend parked, and as I got out, I looked up again, and she was still there, still staring at us. As we both walked towards the entry door, I could make out her features. You know how some people just have that crazy look to them? This was her. Mangled brown hair and wide open eyes. She had to be at least 60 or 70, and this frown she had, I've never seen someone so angry. My boyfriend puts the key in the door and we enter, and not to my surprise, we see her standing at the top of the stairs. She says nothing. She just stands there, watching us. She's very small and round, but the way she was standing, you could see her arms and legs were very thin. My boyfriend and I looked at each other for a second, and then we began to make our way up. We walked up while she stared us down, but to my amazement, she didn't say anything. Rather, she just stared at us with her creepy eyes. I kept looking back as my boyfriend entered the code and we hurried into the apartment. "What the hell was that?" my boyfriend said softly, looking at me confused. I shook my head as I was just glad she didn't try to talk to us. Nothing weird happened the rest of the night until we heard banging on the front door. I shot up from bed just to find that my boyfriend was already awake. The banging was non-stop for maybe a minute or two until it suddenly went silent. I looked at my phone and it was nearly 4 a.m. Who would be banging on the door at this time? My boyfriend walked towards the door, whispering to me that he was going to look out the peephole to see who was there. I trailed behind him slowly as he inspected. He looked back at me and was clearly confused. He then opened the door a little to look around, and I heard him gasp. "What?" I whispered, and slowly stepped towards him. Laying on the welcome mat outside the door were 3 dead rats, and they looked completely gutted, with only one of them still having their head attached. He closed the door and we both agreed to contact the host later that day. I tried my best to sleep, but the images of those rats kept replaying in my mind. After a while, I looked at my phone and it was 6:30. Accepting the fact that I won't be able to get any sleep, I got up to make coffee, and as I did, I heard the neighbor's door slam shut. I looked out the kitchen window, which overlooks the parking lot, in hopes to get a glimpse of the crazy lady. And there she was, standing and staring at our parked car. Not even looking at what was inside, she was just staring at it. She looked so focused on our car for the longest time, and then she slowly turned her head to look directly at me. I jumped back a little bit and immediately heard her shriek, this horrible blood-curdling shriek like she was being attacked. My boyfriend ran out of the bedroom, obviously alarmed, and we both looked out the window again. The neighbor was standing there, holding her head, screaming at the driver's side window. She grabbed the top of the car and started banging her head, screaming things like, "They never leave, when will they leave, and why do they keep coming?" I started recording for insurance purposes, and my boyfriend called the police and then the host. By the time the police had shown up, she was laying on the ground next to our car, which had very little damage considering what we just witnessed. The host profusely apologized and said that this had never happened before and refunded our entire trip. We got to see the lady taken away in handcuffs, though it took her a while to comply. We never found out what was wrong with her, but my theory is something just snapped, and we just happened to be the ones that were there when it happened. But I do know that you should take every review into consideration when booking an Airbnb. Every single one. This happened a few years back, when my friends and I had just finished our sophomore year of college. Finally done with school for a few months, we wanted to celebrate a little bit to start off summer break. All of us had small jobs near the campus, so we saved up some money. We decided to go big and take a trip to Las Vegas for a few days, as none of us have ever been. At first, we were looking through hotels in the city to try and find something cheap, but still big enough for the four of us. Eventually, we gave up on that and started looking at Airbnbs, as most of them were cheaper and bigger. We found a few good ones, but ended up choosing the largest one with the most rooms. Fast forward to a couple weeks later, our Uber picked us up from the airport and dropped us off at the house. It honestly looked even bigger in person, and we were all really excited to spend the next few days here. We all unpacked and relaxed for a couple of hours, as we were a little bit worn out from the flight. A few hours after the sun went down, me and my friend Alyssa were the only ones still awake. It wasn't too late, probably 8 or 8:30, but the other two had decided to go to bed early. With nothing really to do, Alyssa offered to take a walk outside and explore the neighborhood a little bit. I agreed, eager to see the unique homes. I should mention, our Airbnb was a pretty nice house, and the neighboring homes were really nice too. This definitely wasn't a sketchy street or anything, so we didn't even really think twice about going for a walk around. We headed outside and down the street. After passing 6 or 7 houses, the street took a sharp turn and connected to another crossing road with homes on the side. It was strange though, as these homes were nothing like the ones we just walked by on our street. These were basically run-down shacks. And I don't mean to be rude or anything, it was just really strange to see such a sudden change in homes after only turning the corner. We continued on a little bit, noticing the broken windows, missing mailboxes, and even worn-out vacant signs on a lot of the doors. One of the houses even had a sofa chair right in the middle of their front yard with rips and stains on it. We agreed to take the next turn towards our Airbnb and head back. But a couple minutes later, we saw a small SUV coming towards us from down the road with its headlights off. As it got closer, it began to slow down and eventually stopped right next to us. An older woman, probably 50 to 60 years old, rolled down the window and with a big smile said, "You two are such a cute couple." She was making really weird, jerky motions with her head in her arms and was just acting really strange. I replied, "Thank you," as to just end the conversation quickly and get her to leave. Luckily it worked. She continued down the road and we did as well in the opposite direction. After a few minutes, we found the next turn and got back to the street with our Airbnb. We were both really shook and creeped out by the whole situation and just wanted to get inside and forget about it, but just as we got to the driveway, we saw the old lady's SUV turn down our road and start heading towards us again. We were halfway up the driveway when she stopped right in front of the house. But this time it was a little different. She just looked at us. She didn't say anything or have any emotion in her face. She was just staring. Alyssa hurried inside, and I quickly followed. I heard the car continue back down the road as I was closing the door behind us. We stayed up for a little bit longer, locking all the doors and checking the windows to make sure she didn't come back. After an hour, we agreed that we were probably okay, so we went to our rooms and got ready for bed. The next day, we told our other friends what had happened, and they were pretty creeped out too. We ended up telling the owner of the Airbnb about the whole situation, and we even asked if we could cancel our third day so we could leave early, and thankfully he agreed. For the rest of that day, we decided to get away from the house and hang out in the city to try and enjoy at least one of our days in Vegas. We actually ended up having a lot of fun, but as the night came closing in, we were ready to call an Uber and head back to the house. During the ride back, I received a text from the owner that said, "Is this the lady from last night?" with a picture attached. I opened it and saw a screenshot from the Ring doorbell footage of the lady standing outside of the house. I replied to the owner and immediately showed all of my friends. We didn't know what to do, so we asked the driver to drop us off at a hotel parking lot, just a couple blocks from our house, while the owner called the police. After about 45 minutes, the owner called me and said the house was clear and we could go back. But he mentioned the police never found the lady. This obviously made none of us feel any better. We got to the house and pretty much immediately started packing all of our stuff so we could leave right away in the morning. Nothing happened overnight or the next morning, but I can say for sure that none of us got good sleep. We got out of there as soon as we could and headed for the airport. This was definitely one of the strangest things to ever happen to me, and I still think about it a lot. The only advice I can give is to always check the area around your Airbnb before you book it. I have no idea what she wanted or why she was stalking us, but it really freaks me out to think about what would have happened if the owner didn't have a doorbell camera, or if we had stayed that third day.
I owned an Airbnb house for several years. I stopped due to the stress of keeping up with it, as well as maintaining my actual job. The benefit of using Airbnb instead of renting the place out like you normally would is that you would have the chance to make a lot more money if your house gets booked a lot. Being in a relatively high traffic area for vacations, Airbnb was a great option for us. My wife and I were excited in the beginning, but it got more demanding as more people booked the house. We needed to keep everything on schedule and hire cleaning services after the first customers left and before the next ones came, as well as be sure to respond to their messages and emails in a timely manner. But things were going well for a couple years before we had what we thought was a young couple staying at the house. Just like every other time, when they arrived, I texted them the unlock code for the door. I almost never actually see the customers. After they let me know that they were inside and everything was good, I sat back and relaxed for the rest of my day off. I should also mention that I almost never even talk to the customers more than just a couple texts. Usually they text me when they get there and when they leave, and sometimes an occasional question about the house, but that's usually it. But as 9 o'clock came around and I was just about to get ready for bed, I got a text from the young man staying at the house. It was short, saying he was going to call me in a minute, and then a minute later he called. I already had a bad feeling when I saw the text, but what he said still surprised me. He said that the water wasn't working in the house. Of course, I apologized, though I didn't understand how that could be possible. But living in a house without water is unacceptable, so I knew I had to get it fixed immediately. I asked if I could come check it out really quick so that I could have someone come in the morning to fix it. He agreed, being very polite about the whole thing, and I drove over there a few minutes later. Pulling into the driveway, I noticed 2 cars. At the time, this wasn't necessarily a red flag, but more just an odd thing I noticed because they were apparently a young couple on vacation for a single night, so I didn't understand why they would rent 2 separate cars. I thought someone must be visiting them, which actually isn't allowed, but I didn't mind so much. I walked up to the front door and knocked, before entering the code and walking inside. It was very quiet. I expected them to be waiting for me, but they weren't anywhere that I could see. I probably should have looked around for them first, but I was tired and just wanted to get this over with. The first thing I wanted to check was the main water valve to make sure there wasn't a leak or a flood, so I went down to the basement and over to the valve. Everything seemed normal, no water anywhere or signs of damage. I was confused, but then I fiddled with the valve and immediately heard water start rushing again. I turned it more, realizing it had been completely shut off manually. I stayed in the basement for another minute, trying to understand why this was done, before I started to get a really uncomfortable feeling, especially since I didn't even see the people when I walked inside. I just couldn't see how it could have been anyone other than them who turned off the water, which meant they were trying to get me to come over on purpose, or maybe give them a discount on their stay for the inconvenience. I decided I was going to leave and get in my car, then try calling them back, just to be safe. I got up and started walking towards the stairs, until I heard the basement door open, followed by multiple sets of footsteps walking down. When they got to the bottom, 3 men stood there.
Is it fixed?
One of them said, sounding like the same man I talked to on the phone, though all of these men were much older than the young man that I thought was staying at the house. I told him it should be working now, and that the valve must have just tightened on its own. I was trying not to point any blame, since the whole thing was making me so uncomfortable. I just wanted to get out of that basement and away from these guys. They all just kind of stood there looking at me, not saying anything after that.
Well, let me know if you need anything else,
I said, walking between them, trying to get to the stairs. They still just stood there, watching me walk around them, but as I went past the third guy closest to the stairs, I spotted a gun shoved in the back of his pants. It made me freak out a little, and I rushed a bit quicker up the stairs, but they didn't follow. They stayed in the basement as I quickly walked out the door and drove away. When I got home, I woke up my wife and told her what had happened. She convinced me to call the police to check up on them. They weren't the people we thought were staying there, and the situation was strange, so it felt justified. I think we waited 20 minutes before a call came from an officer claiming nobody seemed to be home and that he may need me to open the door. I gave him the code instead, and he called back another 20 minutes later, saying that there was no signs of anyone still being there. The next day, we found out the card the man paid with was stolen, and after looking around the house, they had stolen some expensive decorations and appliances as well. I guess there never actually was a young couple either. The one thing that was left unexplained was their whole plan with the water not working. I think they either wanted me to not charge them for their stay, so that hopefully they could use the stolen card for longer, or they were planning on robbing me at gunpoint. But then that makes me question why they didn't. 3 dangerous, unidentified men blocking my exit in the basement after leading me into a trap, and they just let me go. It doesn't make sense to me, but after that, I never went to the house while customers were home, and a few months later, we stopped using AirBnB and just put the house up for rent. I was taking a solo trip to Salt Lake City last year. I'd never actually had the chance to go on many vacations before, and when I did, it was always with my family. This was the first time I was finally going to get to enjoy my time somewhere else all by myself. I know it sounds a bit weird, but being alone is fine with me, especially since I'd never get to be alone. Anyway, I looked up both hotels and Airbnbs in the area, and surprisingly, the Airbnbs were a lot nicer and less pricey. However, all the cheaper ones were a bit further away from the city. I was driving my own car though, so I didn't care too much about having to travel a bit to the city, and went with a nicely sized Airbnb. It was small, but the kitchen and bedroom were nice, which was all I really cared about. I got there at 6 on Sunday morning. The owner texted me the password, and I brought all of my stuff inside. It was really nice, much better than the small apartment I shared with my roommate. Once I got everything inside and set up, I hopped on the couch and turned on the TV. It was a 10-hour drive, so I was looking forward to chilling for the night and enjoying the silence. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but it was only around 7 o'clock, so my body woke me up a few hours later. The time was just past 10, and the TV was still on. I grabbed the remote and turned it off, then got up to get a glass of water before going to the bedroom. As I walked from the living room to the kitchen, I felt a strong, cold breeze brush against me. With my tired eyes, I looked to my right and saw the front door was fully open. My eyes shot open and my heart pounded. I stared at the door for a moment, then looked around the room. I knew I had closed it and locked it, so this was really freaking me out. I walked over to the door and closed it softly, listening intently for any sounds of someone being inside. For reference, I'm not the biggest guy in the world, but I am fairly tall and in shape, so unless an intruder had a gun, I felt confident I could force them away. I grabbed a kitchen knife, still being quiet, and walked room to room, checking every inch of the house. Nobody was there. This only confused me more, and I sent a text to the homeowner asking if someone was supposed to come over tonight or something, explaining what happened. It was late though, so I didn't expect a response right away. I went around to every door, locking each one, then quickly checked the house again. While more awake than I was before, I was still really tired. I went to bed and fell asleep with no trouble. When I woke up though, I was much less calm than I was before. I heard something from outside. Not outside the house, but outside my bedroom door. I didn't know what to do and kind of just froze, waiting for whoever was outside the room to do something first. As I sat there in bed, I thought about how the person could have possibly gotten in. The only person who would have the password to the door was the homeowner, so honestly, in that moment, I was sure it was him. This gave me more courage, thinking it must be some creepy guy who likes to spy on the people who stay at his Airbnb. I got out of bed, still not having heard anything else, and grabbed my phone from the nightstand to call the cops. I must have made too much noise though, because almost right away, someone started running away from the door and toward the front of the house. That only frightened me more, knowing the intruder was standing right next to the bedroom door the entire time. I dialed 911, but during the time it took for the cops to arrive, nothing else happened. The person had left. I found a hotel to stay at for the rest of the vacation, but what's crazy is that the owner of the Airbnb gave me a refund, as he was able to prove it wasn't him. He was very concerned about it, and he was actually a really nice old man. It was already creepy enough when I thought it was the owner, but knowing that it was just some random guy makes it even worse. I don't know how he was able to get in, or why he was stalking me, but it still gives me chills thinking about it. The part I think about the most is waking up and seeing the front door open. Now that I know that someone was actually in the house, that meant that whoever it was came in and saw me asleep on the couch, then proceeded to do whatever it was they came there to do. It's just really unnerving and creepy, and makes me never want to be at an Airbnb alone. I was staying at a small 2-bedroom Airbnb during a vacation I took last year. This place was on the way to another Airbnb that I was going to stay at for the main portion of the vacation, but this was more of just a rest stop for the night. The place was clean and empty, just as expected when I arrived. I walked around the whole house to check it out before bringing in my luggage and sitting on the couch. It was probably 8 p.m. by this time of night. As I sat, dozing off a little, the doorbell ringing made me jolt awake. I looked over at the front door, confused and alarmed. I was a pretty small, young girl, so it's safe to say I'm often scared easily and don't like talking to strangers, especially at night when I'm alone. I got up and walked over to the door, hearing 2 men whispering to each other on the other side. The door didn't have a safety lock or anything, so I just kept the door shut and called out to them. "Hello? Hey, we're here for the Airbnb. Can you open the door?" A man called out. I loudly asked what they meant, not understanding what being here for the Airbnb was supposed to mean. He responded, saying that he had the place booked for the night. I knew there had to be some sort of mistake, so I told him, still yelling through the door, that I had it booked as well and that he needed to contact the owner. The man didn't seem happy about that, although if I were in his position, I'd be pretty upset too. I heard one pair of footsteps walk away from the door, while the other man asked again if I could open the door so that we could talk about it. I was about to give in, putting my hand on the doorknob, thinking that he seemed believable, but something came over me telling me to just play it safe. I said my husband would be down to figure it out in a few minutes. I didn't want them to think I was alone, so I was hoping that would catch him off guard if something was bad. The man didn't respond though. I waited for another minute, because I didn't hear any footsteps leaving, but then I moved the short curtain to the side and looked out the small window. The man I'd seemingly been talking to was facing towards his car, parked in the driveway, and past him was one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen. a group of maybe 5 people was standing further down the driveway, kind of hiding, as if waiting for a signal. They all had some form of face coverings, and I couldn't see the other side of the door, but I assumed there were even more people over there. Knowing that this was very likely a gang due to the city I was staying in, I was completely horrified. I backed away from the door, fully panicked and trying not to hyperventilate. I then went to the bedroom to get my phone and call the police, and I could hear more footsteps all around the house. It was like I was surrounded by a pack of wolves who at any minute could crush the windows and break inside. I took my phone into the bathroom with me and called 911, trying to remain calm. The operator also told me to be quiet and stay calm, as they were sending a group my way and would be there in just a few minutes. I stayed on the line, still hearing footsteps walking around outside the place, until the horrible sound of wood bending and then snapping came from the front door. I was crying profusely now, trying to muffle my mouth with my hand. I listened as a whole group of people ran inside, opening doors and cabinets before one approached the bathroom door and tried the handle. "Here," he yelled, then walked away. The group continued looting the house before sirens were heard in the distance and they began to scatter out of the place. They had all left by the time the police got inside, and all of my luggage was gone, and my car had its windows shattered and was looted as well. One of the officers sat with me to discuss some details, and he informed me that they've been having problems with large groups or gangs breaking into homes recently. They don't think the main goal is to hurt the residents at all, but rather to just rob them of everything. So that's likely why they left me alone in the bathroom, knowing I wasn't a threat. Whether their intentions were to harm me or not, it was still terrifying. I know it likely had little to do with me staying at the Airbnb that night, but it has still made me really anxious every single time I stay at an Airbnb now.